Well, thanks for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. We're going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to give a talk. I have a fancy PowerPoint presentation for the next slide when we talk about Generation Z. But what we're going to do is actually something I call my atheist encounter. So I brought with me what I call my atheist glasses. There's nothing about the glasses per se, but when these glasses go on like a superhero, my worldview will transform from Christian Bible teacher and professor to atheist. I'm going to take maybe 5 minutes and just set up my character, which is actually the character of a friend of mine who lives not far from here, and then open it up. We have at least 1 or 2 mics that will go around the room, and you can ask me anything you'd like to ask an atheist. And I'm going to do my best to respond as an atheist might. Then I'll take the glasses off. We will debrief the experience and then transition into the next talk on Gen Z. Okay, are you guys ready for this atheist encounter? Good, 3 of you are. This is wonderful. So let me set up a couple things just in case. Number 1, if somebody walks in late, can you please tell them what we are doing? So I've mentioned that I teach at Biola, and one of the most memorable chapels there is we had a missionary to Muslims. He came in, he said, I'm going to give a Muslim evangelistic message so you can hear what it would be like, and then I'm going to take questions from the student body. I thought, this is so interesting. Well, he starts doing his spiel, and a student walks in the back late not knowing what's going on. From the top of his lungs in front of the entire student body, he shouts out, "This is not the house of Allah. This is the house of the one true living God." Awkward. Every time I saw that guy, I was like, yep, there goes that guy. So someone comes in late, tip them off a role playing. Second, I'm not saying all atheists believe as I do in character. There's people that are existentialists, nihilists, psychohumanists, Marxists. There's atheists. I debated a guy a few months ago. He calls himself the friendly atheist. He's a nice guy. And then there's some atheists where I would not use the adjective friendly, and everywhere in between. So it really just kind of depends on what mood I'm in. And I'm still ticked the Chargers lost, so you might be in for a treat. All right, so glasses go on. Going to transition into an atheist, take 4 or 5 minutes, just tell my story, and then open up for questions. Again, you can ask me anything, clarification, raise a challenge, make a point, and I'll respond as an atheist might. Just state your question as quickly as you can. I'll allow you to come back, and then we'll try to get as many questions as we can. All right? Now, are you ready? All right, here we go. Good afternoon, River City. Thank you for having me, an atheist, at your church to speak. As you can imagine, this is an unusual invitation for me. I get invited to debate Christians and sometimes give lectures on college campuses, but rarely to talk to a Christian group as an atheist. And there might be a lot of reasons for this, but I think one reason is we know as an atheist, I base my beliefs on facts and reasons and evidence. And we know that Christianity is based upon faith, which is believing something without evidence. So it might be that we just see the world differently. Regardless, I'm happy to be here, and I want you to know that I actually grew up in a Christian home. I went to church. I went on mission trips to places like Mexico to build homes for people. I sang worship songs. I shared my faith, read my Bible, went to camp, did all the things I was told to do to be a good Christian young man. And then when I was about maybe freshman, sophomore in high school, kind of 14, 15 years old, I had this friend. We debate movies, we debate sports, we debate politics, and we debate religion. One day she asked me some questions I hadn't really thought about before. My first thought was what my pastor said, and then I thought, well, the Bible says, and I thought my parents taught me, and then the next thought was like a light went on. I thought, I really don't have a clue what I'm talking about. I'm going to go seek out the evidence and believe wherever it points, and I realize there's no good scientific evidence that God exists. There's no reason to think the Bible's true. I mean, it's full of far too many errors, contradictions, and immoral teachings to come from a holy God. I mean, genocide and slavery and misogyny all over the Bible. Then I began to realize there's no good evidence Jesus even lived, let alone resurrected. Christianity is better explained as being patterned after these dying and rising gods of the ancient Near East, and I became an atheist. It was hard at first, I'll be honest with you, but over time it was actually freeing to just embrace reality as it is and make the most out of the life that I have. So I guess here's how I look at it. You guys remember the stories of the ancient Greco-Roman like gods like Zeus and Poseidon and Hades? You remember these stories? Raise your hand if you remember these. Okay, good. I suspect that most of you would remember this. So when the ancient Greeks couldn't explain something like, say, earthquakes, what did they say was the cause? The gods are angry, right? Or they couldn't explain rain, so they said what? The gods are crying? No, gods don't cry. The goddesses were crying. You know, that joke only worked before the Wonder Woman movie. I'd pretty much take her over any superhero in a battle. Point is, you know I'm messing with you, is that the ancient Greeks didn't understand why the ground moved, so they inserted the gods to explain something for which they lacked an explanation or a mechanism. This is called God of the gaps. But the problem is people try to explain things as if God did it, but when science advances, we realize it's plate tectonics, not the gods. It's the hydrological cycle, not the gods or goddesses. The more science advances, the smaller those gaps become. Now look, if you want to believe in God because it gives you community, that's fine. If it gives you purpose, gives you friendships, great, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is when people say it's true, and then threaten people with hell without giving any evidence for it? Man, by the way, I'm open to evidence. If you could convince me it's true, I'd want to believe it. I could keep telling stories and talking, but I think it'd be much more interesting if we just had a conversation. So I'm curious, what would you like to ask an atheist? Where's the mics? Do we have the mics? We have at least one or two. We've got one up here. 2 mics. If you guys just want to spread out, raise your hand, and we'll go. I see one in the back there. And we'll go back and forth as quickly as we can. Let's see those baseball moves, Pastor Matt. And I'll do my best to answer. Yes. Hold up the mic.
Stand.
Oh, you don't. It's up to you.
All right. Dr. McDowell's not evil twin, but twin.
It's Dr. Johnson, just for the record. Thank you, though.
Earlier you mentioned God is immoral for genocide, etc., misogyny.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, what's your moral standard? Where are you getting your moral standard from? Is it your standard, or is it a standard above?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly not the Bible. I notice you guys don't take the Bible seriously either. We're in a church. Women aren't wearing hats, and I've heard some of you speak, so you really are selective anyways. I don't use the Bible as a standard of morality. I think it's common sense. The golden rule. You go, Jesus said that. You find the golden rule across different cultures because it's a common sense moral principle.
Okay, but what about for those that don't, or am I allowed to ask more?
Sure.
Okay, sorry. What about those who don't follow the golden rule? I mean, you're going on a society.
Yeah, that's easy. It's
okay,
like they're wrong.
Sorry. I'm sorry, what did you say?
They're wrong if they don't follow the golden rule. They're harming people. And so for society to flourish and function, we have rules. He can follow up one more time. He's doing great. So they're wrong. I don't have a problem saying someone's wrong historically, someone's wrong scientifically, and somebody can be wrong morally speaking. We don't need a God to tell us that. It's obvious.
Okay, but society at one point said slavery in America was okay. If you were in Germany in the 1940s, you would say the Nazis and Germany in general would say, hey, that's not a person, that's a Jew.
Or if you read the Bible, you'd say we can wipe out all the Amalekites, right? Same principle. I never said society is the standard. Okay, I never said morality changes over time.
Okay, but where
people can fail to follow it. It's been wired into us by evolution. We know it because we're human. This separates us from different organisms and species. It's common sense. We don't need an ancient book to tell us this. Good questions. Let's go over here so we give as many chances as we can. Put your hand up high and he can come around and find you if you have a question. Yes?
Hi, Dr. Johnson. I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
One, do you believe that all people at some point worship something? And if you believe that, where does that come from if we evolved?
No, I don't think people worship something. A lot of people do. Religion is pretty widespread, but I don't know that everybody worships something. How would you know that something all people do unless you've interviewed all people? But if people did, it would just show that religion has been wired into us through evolution, and maybe worshiping something has some survival advantage for us. It wouldn't show there's actually a God, right? I mean, that wouldn't follow. You're welcome to follow up, or if I answered your question, we can. Is that fair? Okay. Next question.
Where does love come from?
Where does love come from? Again, not God. I mean, honestly, just look in the Bible how God treats people. You could not get a definition of love by looking. Okay, don't leave yet if she's got the mic, if the person wants to follow up. Again, I think love is common sense. Now, we feel it because of certain chemicals in our brain, because the way we're wired. But love comes from choices that we make and how we treat people.
So love is chemicals?
I didn't say love is only chemicals, but there are chemicals involved when we love somebody. Sure. Yeah, it's called oxytocin.
So, but the origin of love?
I don't know what you mean by the origin of love. We can see it in behavior.
Okay.
We can see it in choices that we make. We can reflect upon the idea. Some things just exist.
So love is just chemicals and behavior?
Again, I never said it's just chemicals and behavior, but chemicals are associated with it, and something is loving or not loving based upon how we treat somebody, and we often experience that through the chemicals. So it's broader than saying it's just chemicals.
Okay, and I'm going to, you can pull away the mic if you want, but I wanted to ask you also, how does chaos come out of order?
Do you mean order out of chaos?
I mean order come out of chaos. Thank you.
It's actually really easy. The certain laws of nature cause order to come out of chaos. We see it all the time. Look, have you ever seen chaos in the ocean and a whirlpool emerge out of it? A helicopter was looking over the ocean a while ago, and it showed this whirlpool that emerged. That was order out of chaos. This actually happens all the time. And it doesn't violate the second law of thermodynamics, which might be true as a whole, but there are pockets that reverse this, where we see order just kind of emerging. We can actually observe it. It's a good question.
Hello, Dr. Johnson. I've got a question about evidence. The Bible talks about the testimony of the disciples and Christ's followers of seeing Jesus alive after the resurrection. Not only are there believers that testify to him being alive, there's also non-believers. Josephus, a secular and competent historian, acknowledged to seeing Christ alive after the resurrection.
Really, where did he concede this? Which of his books?
I don't have the answer to that.
Well, you stood up and said it. So there's a book he wrote called Antiquities of the Jews in AD 93. Josephus, a Jew, wrote it. There's a passage in chapter 20 typically attributed to saying Christians worship Jesus. He was killed by Pontius Pilate under Tiberius Caesar, rose on the third day. That passage in Antiquities 20 was inserted in the 10th century by Christians. That passage is not in any of our earliest manuscripts of Josephus. Not a single early Christian source cited it. So you commonly hear this, but if you probe a little more deeply, you realize, by the way, if you really saw Jesus, wouldn't he have become a Christian if he rose on the third day? He didn't, because the passage was interpolated and inserted later on. So look it up. I think you'll find it. It's on Google. Trust me, you can believe it. Who's got the mic?
As an atheist, I gather you believe that life began by chance?
No.
You don't believe that life began by chance as an atheist?
No.
Well, as an atheist, do you hold to the theory that life could have began by chance?
No.
How did it begin then?
I think the RNA world hypothesis is the best explanation that we have. Chance is one factor, but there's also other law-like factors at play. There's laws of nature, and there is a chance component that combine together. It's not just chance. This is a misunderstanding I used to hold when I was a Christian. I'd look at numbers and say, by chance, it's impossible. But then we can see certain natural laws for which order comes out of disorder. And I mean, I could bore you with the details, but the RNA world hypothesis actually can explain really well the first emergence of a self-catalyzing molecule.
But does not RNA come from a living organism which contains carbon?
It doesn't come from a living organism. It carries some of the information, biological information for an organism. It doesn't come from it. It's the basis for it.
Well, given that your answer, in this world there's two kingdoms of life, plant and animal. Of the two, which do you feel came first, and how did one transform from one to the other?
I think they're separate trees of life, so to speak, that explain plants and explain organisms. So there is what's called a plant radiation where the first simple plants emerge. This is millions of years after the first single-celled organism emerges. So they're separate. Good questions. There's a lot of people with hands, so let's keep going. Yes?
Hi, Dr. Johnson. How do you believe the universe started? Was it like the big explosion, the Big Bang?
I'm not sure we really know how the universe started.
What do you think, though?
I don't think we know. I think anybody who says we know is speaking beyond what the scientific evidence points towards. We don't know.
No, we don't. My question would be, if I wanted to bake a cake, could I get all the ingredients, put them on the counter, blow them up, and expect a cake to show up?
Okay, so if you're referring to the Big Bang, here's why the analogy falls short. The Big Bang is not an explosion of something that's pre-existing. It's the barrier between time and matter and energy itself, at least as far as our universe is concerned. Look, the problem is, I just read a book about this yesterday called Can We Escape the Beginning by a professor at UCLA. And he said, quantum mechanics is one of the most attested, proven scientific theories we have. It points towards no beginning. General relativity is also one of the most powerfully attested theories we have, points towards the beginning. But they can't both be true. And there's no quantum theory of gravity, so we don't know. We actually don't know. Any honest person would have to say we don't know. By the way, if you say God started the universe, you're left with a problem. Who made God? Where did God come from? And that doesn't kind of answer the problem.
You might be left with the problem.
I don't believe in God. Why would I have the problem of explaining where God came from if I don't believe in God? And you say, well, God just is, and if God just is, then the universe can just be. Right? If we're going to be consistent.
Dr. Johnson, question for you. I'm a creationist. I believe God created the universe and everything that exists now. From hearing you talk, it sounds like you're more of an evolutionist, believing that we evolved or came through time. You're talking about the laws of thermodynamics. My question for you, I studied biochemistry in college, and there was this one problem that always would come up for evolutionists. I just want to see what your thought was on it. So, simple biology 101, we take sugar, we use something called the glycolysis cycle to make pyruvate, which is our basic fundamental for ATP, which powers the cells. So my question for you, just in a simple pathway turning sugar into pyruvate, which is our energy source, you need 4 rate-limiting step enzymes. So how do you explain how creation, or through evolution, we were able to evolve enzymes that you need each one to go from like step 1 to step 10? If you don't have step 4, you can't go to step 5. How would an evolutionist believe that you can evolve a very complex sequence in a row without having to
So a couple things that I would say. Number one, my belief in evolution is not giving some alleged pathway for this sugar problem that you're talking about.
Okay.
I don't have a clue. I haven't studied that particular.
Most people I've talked to don't.
No, listen very carefully. I haven't studied that particular nuanced issue that you're talking about. So that doesn't mean that evolution is somehow false. It just means I haven't studied that particular issue, and I would fully concede that. The reason I believe in evolution is because the evidence for evolution is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And I'll tell you why, and then I'll come back to address the principle of your problem. Number one would be human and chimp DNA, about 99.72% the same. Number two would be homologous structures we see across different ancestors, different species pointing towards a common ancestor. Number 3 would be the biogeographical distribution of animals fits exactly the pattern of out of Africa and development. You look at embryological development. I mean, you look at the fossil record, actually, and the subtle growth over time and genetic changes fits this evolutionary model. Now, what you're raising is what's called irreducible complexity, that you have to have all the parts in place for the system to work. It couldn't be produced in a step-by-step manner.
No.
Correct. Now, here's what I know. Every single supposedly irreducibly complex system I have seen, when probed enough, we find a natural explanation for it. So, for example, the flagellum, the famous intelligent design argument, you have all these interworking parts. Well, in the 2003 book he wrote with Dembski by Oxford University Press, professor from Brown University, Ken Miller, wrote an article called The Flagellum Unspun and actually showed a naturalistic mechanism by which it can come about. Same with cilia, same with every single other irreducibly complex system that I'm aware of. So this is a new one. I would have to look at the details. The history tells us that we're going to find a very good explanation for it if we probe it enough. But if you say God did it, you stop science from moving forward. You prevent science from moving forward.
No, because I think
it's a science stopper.
No, science shows how our God created the universe. It doesn't take away from that.
No, well, you just asserted that. You have to give some evidence that science points towards a creator. So a complex molecular system is not evidence for God. It's evidence that the world is complex. Let's find a solution to it. You're done? Okay, good. Good question. By the way, how many of you don't believe in evolution? Let me see your hands. How many of you don't believe in Darwinian evolution? Let me see your hands. Okay, it looks like most of you don't believe in it. How many of you can define it for me? Put your hands up. I'm going to call on you. Just give me a definition. Give me a definition of Darwinian evolution. Okay, wait a minute. None of you believe in it, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 of you think you can define it. Don't you think you should understand something before you reject it? I mean, honestly. If I told you I didn't believe in the Bible, I think it's false, and you asked me if you read it, I was like, I don't have to read it, I know it's false. What would you say? Read it first. Read it first. Now, at least my man has read it and thought about this. This is good, but I would say be careful. You're on your way to becoming a skeptic. Let's go to the next question.
Dr. Johnson, how would you respond to the problem of infinite regressive causes as a general principle and then specifically applied to time?
The problem only emerges if we assume the universe is not eternal and infinite. If the universe is eternal, or the multiverse, which inflationary theory points towards there being a multiverse, then the problem doesn't emerge. If the universe is finite, then it does emerge. Because you would say God can be self-existent and doesn't need a cause. Fine, I would say the same about the universe.
What about the Vilenkin theorem on multiverses, which seems to indicate, and is well accepted, that if there are multiverses, they emerged out of the Big Bang?
Okay, Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin, the BGV theorem only applies to certain kinds of multiverse theories. It doesn't apply to quantum multiverse theories.
Which are all speculative,
correct? Listen very carefully. Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin. Vilenkin believed the universe had a beginning. Guth does not. So even the proponents of that theory differ whether it points towards a beginning or not. Trust me, I read it yesterday. Let's go over here.
So my question is, what do you think is going to happen when you die, and what if you're wrong about that?
That's a good question. So I appreciate you asking this, though, but I think you probably know what I think happens when you die, right? That's it. Life is over. There's not a shred of evidence for a soul. There's no evidence that you have a soul that survives the death of your body. There's no evidence for this. We know this because when you change somebody's brain, it changes their personality. The brain is the seat of personality, not the soul. So when you die, whether you think that's depressing or not, it doesn't make it true or false. What if I'm wrong? Well, it's not either your opinion or mine. If I'm wrong and Muslims are right, we both go to hell. We do. What if New Agers are right, or Eastern religions will get reincarnated? We'll get another chance. Hey, maybe Rob Bell is right and I go to heaven anyways. I mean, there's a lot of options here. If you could give me some evidence that Christianity is true, I'd believe it. I just don't find any evidence that it's true. And besides, your God doesn't want people to believe in him just because they're afraid of what's going to happen, right? Isn't that what the Bible at least says? So, fair question, but just give me evidence it's true and I'll believe it.
So then, if I were to tell you that I actually had a lucid and sober experience with my mother's soul after she died in this earthly life, how would you explain that to me? Am I delusional?
I don't know you, lady, and that's unfair. You are setting me up with a lose-lose proposition. I would, look, here's what my experience says. I've met people who are Mormons, who are Buddhists, who are all sorts of religions, including A.J. Iyer, an atheist, who had this kind of spiritual experience. The brain's a pretty amazing thing that can recall even subconscious experiences that we have. Doesn't really prove that God exists. So I just want some evidence. So if you could tell me you had an experience and there's something you found out and knew that you couldn't have known otherwise, that would be interesting, but I just need to see the evidence. But I'd love to believe it if it's true.
I have a couple questions, and they're not nearly as scientific as all these other ones have been. I'm just wondering, do you feel like there's any meaning in life for you? And then the second question that I had is, what's your relationship with your father like?
Good question. Let me take them in reverse. I have a great relationship with my dad. We spend time together all the time. So he believes in God, but he got over the fact that we disagree. We go golfing, play basketball, go to movies. I have a great relationship with him. Meaning to life, yeah. I've got kids, there's knowledge, there's good food, there's traveling, there's relationships, there's sex, there's all sorts of things that make life meaningful. Yeah.
So in your heart of hearts, when you're by yourself, do you ever feel disappointed or sad that there's nothing that's going to be beyond this life for you?
No, I kind of feel like a finite life makes it more valuable. Instead of saying it goes on forever, this is finite. Make it count while you're here. So that gives me a sense of urgency rather than despair.
So when somebody that you love dies, how do you feel?
Sad.
And do you feel like it would be, well, with the sense that there's no hope for anything more beyond this?
I feel sad for him. I mean, I could try to delude myself that there's something in the afterlife, but without evidence for it, what's the point? I would know I'm fooling myself. It's just the way life is. I mean, I can't change it. Once you accept it, it's actually kind of freeing. Don't look at me, I don't have the mic. Hold up money, they'll come get you. This is a church, right?
You spoke earlier of RNA being what brought life about, along with, I can't recall all the details you said.
Sure.
But if RNA has information on it, in it, where did the information come from? Doesn't information mean it came from some sort of intelligence?
So that's why I actually qualified it with biological information. So the word information is used by biologists, but they don't mean the same thing that you and I mean, like when we look at information, a book that comes from an author. Physicists will talk about nothing, but they don't mean what we mean by nothing. So the parlance of biological information shouldn't be confused with the way we often use information. It's just jargon.
Then what is the information? I mean, you say physicists talk about nothing is not the same way as we do. What they talk about nothing is absolutely nothing when they talk.
No, not physicists. There's actually, I mean, this is not just a side conversation. Certain space, like an empty space, we would call nothing, but there's molecules there, and there's particles, and there's something, but they call it nothing for the sake of certain experiments. I'm just saying we have to be careful. in language that's used professionally in a particular science doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in popular parlance. And we get confused when we read stuff into it that's not really there.
Then what is the information in RNA?
It's biological processes, A, C, T, and G, which are chemical bases that just help determine and shape the functioning of cells and how we operate. It's chemicals. That's all it is. Good question. We got time for a few more.
Hello, Dr. Johnson. My name is Jonathan. Like you, I was also raised in the church, but I do have a simple question for you. What is the meaning in this life?
Well, what do you mean by the meaning in this life?
Is there an object? Is there any kind of goal? Is there anything that you aspire in this life?
Okay, so you confused two things. You said, is there any objective meaning or anything I aspire to? So because I don't think there's an author of life, I'm going to view the purpose of life differently than you do. I think there's purposes within life. Freedom, knowledge, passing on these to the next generation to have the same kind of pleasures and experiences that we have. It's part of being human, enjoying this amazing life that happens to be here. That's it.
And then we die and it's done.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, look, I sense some of you are like, gosh, this is miserable and depressing. That doesn't make it true or false. Doesn't make it true or false. There's a different kind of hope in Christianity and atheism. I fully concede that, but I'm interested in what's true, not what makes me feel good.
Yes. Let's say that all the knowledge in the whole world and the universe is in this room right here. And let's say that you are the smartest person in the world and you know that much, whatever's black, that's how much you know. How can you call yourself an atheist when you don't know the others and what's there?
Do you
have
know
that
what an
knowledge.
atheist is?
You don't believe in God.
So an atheist is someone who lacks belief in God. That's it. I just lack belief in God. Amoral means you lack a sense of morality. Doesn't mean I say God doesn't exist. I lack belief in God. I never said I had all the information or all the knowledge. We have to base decisions upon what we know and how we experience the world.
Well, wouldn't that make you an agnostic and not an atheist?
No, an agnostic is undecided about it. I'm saying I lack belief in God. That's it. I don't have all the information. Nobody does. If it came out in the future and there was information for God, and God judged me, I'd say, look, I based my life on the information that was there. How come you didn't give me more information and evidence?
Oh, there's
And
lots
if God
of
was
information.
remotely reasonable, he would understand.
There's a lot of information out there, the existence of a God. So.
Well, that's an assertion, but I haven't actually seen the evidence. Let's go over here.
Hi, my name is Chris. I want to tell you that I really like your jacket.
Thanks.
It fits you very well. Do you know who designed that jacket?
I forgot. I don't even know off the top of my head.
That's too bad because it's really a nice design. I like your shoes and your tennis shoes. Do they fit very well?
So where's this going, just for sake of time? I think I know where it's going, but I'll let you say it.
You tell me where it's going.
No,
what
you
I'm
have
saying,
the mic.
what I want to ask you is, do you believe that that jacket was perfectly fit for you?
No. Actually, I don't. It was made for a certain size, and I bought it, and it happened to fit me.
Do you believe there's a creator of that jacket?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so have you ever looked outside and seen flowers perfectly balanced?
Okay, so here's the important difference. We have jackets. We can trace them back to a creator.
A designer.
A designer, whatever you want to call it, and actually see the process unfold.
Exactly.
We can do this with shoes. That is not analogous to what we see in nature. If we had a natural process that developed things like jackets, akin to how evolution explains how we develop so-called design, then we wouldn't say jackets always point towards designers or creators. So what we lack for a jacket, we actually have for biological processes.
Interesting. Okay, so, but there is a designer.
That's an assertion.
Who do you contribute to being the artist or designer of the universe, the intricate flowers, how the rose blooms, things like that? I mean, do you believe that there's a designer behind all that?
Of course I don't, right? This is the conversation that we've had. I find no evidence for designer, especially when you look at the things that are so poorly designed within nature, right? Like, why is it that this so-called designer made us to breathe and eat from the same mechanism, and so every year thousands of people choke to death? Why'd this designer give us things like an appendix that we don't need?
It's because they're eating too fast.
And a lot of people die every year. There's so many things that are bad design in nature that count against the point that you're making that we don't see, like, say, on a jacket. So again, like flowers, there's perfectly natural processes for flowers, and we can see the evolution in the rocks and development of flowers.
So who do you give credit to for the design of the universe? That if we were X amount of
I don't believe in a who, and I don't believe in design. Right? I don't give credit to anybody. It's just the way things are.
So you think it's just accident that we are just not close enough to the sun where we would burn, and not far enough from the sun that we would freeze?
I didn't say it was an accident. My man back there said it's chance. I never said chance. I never said accident.
So what do you believe?
About what?
The universe is balanced.
The universe is not in balance. Most of the universe is inhospitable to life. Most of the universe can't support complex life. The vast majority of all that we know, life would die in it. It's only a few minuscule places. When you look how big the universe is, I mean, it's 93 billion miles to our sun, 25 trillion miles to the next star, and there's 100 billion stars at least in our galaxy, and at least 100 billion galaxies. There's a lot of chances for these things to be arranged in at least a few that can support life. So laws of nature and chance are a sufficient explanation. Good question. We got time for maybe one more.
Yeah, my name's Eric. Why is history based on a chronological order of BC and AD? And my second...
So wait, let's take one at a time. I assume you're talking about Western history and you're ignoring all of Eastern history. Correct? I mean, that sounds kind of ethnocentric to me. Right? I mean, Muslims base their calendar on Muhammad's trip up to Medina from Mecca, because that's where he started Islam. So Christianity is based on BC and AD because the Christian story is one of the most influential stories in Western culture. That's it. Doesn't mean it's true, any more than the Eastern calendar is based on Islam being true. It's just an accident of history.
And second question is, do you have faith, and where's your faith lie?
I don't have faith. I have reasoned conviction.
So you don't believe in anything?
No, I didn't say that.
You don't believe in sports?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
So you don't have faith in any of that?
So you guys set up straw men of things. If you notice this, faith is believing something without evidence. Jesus says to Thomas, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Blind faith is held up as a model in the Bible. I don't have faith. I have reasoned conviction and believe things where the evidence points.
Do you think all of our scientists that are trying to prove these theories have faith in their research?
All these scientists? I have no idea what scientists you're talking about. I try to not make generalizations about all scientists. I don't know. There's a difference between blind faith and saying, oh, here's a hypothesis. I'm going to test it, see where the evidence points, and then believe what it likely says to be true, as opposed to saying, I'm going to have faith in an ancient book with contradictions, immoral teaching for which there's no evidence. Like, this is why theology and science are different ways of looking at the world. That's it. One more question. Go to my man all the way over there. I think I can barely see you because of the light. He's so excited over there. You got this. Last one. It better be good. Pressure's on you. All right. Got to be fast. Go.
All right, Dr. Johnson, you seem to be a very intelligent, independent,
thank you,
free-thinking, science-loving person. I need to know, do you believe that you have a free will?
Of course.
You do. And how does science and how do you prove that? Where does it come from?
It comes from quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics is not proved in free will.
No, actually it does. It shows that uncaused things happen all the time, and everything is not determined. That's a part of the fabric of the universe that we live in. Now, there are different theories of quantum mechanics, but one that involves the idea that we have free will is consistent and explains all phenomena as we know it. Free will is not a problem for atheists, it's a problem for Christians. Because you believe God is sovereign and determine you, and yet you think you have free will. So it's ironic that you're raising the free will problem for me when I have an explanation, when Christians can't make up their own mind if you have free will or not, right? I mean, it's more of a theological problem than an atheist problem.
Yeah, I'll just end there. That's my question.
All right, the atheist is gone. I'm never sure if you're clapping because, like, wow, good job, or we're glad the atheist is gone. And I kind of suspect it's the latter one, right? Okay, so here's the deal. Take a deep breath. Take another deep breath. Let it out. I don't believe almost anything that I just said in character. I don't believe almost any of it. My answer's not, well, I've got faith. Christianity makes me feel good. I'm a Christian for one reason. I think it's the only reason anybody should be a Christian, if it's actually true. Even Paul said, if they found the body of Jesus in 1 Corinthians 15, 14, and 17, our faith is worthless. Christianity is tied to objective events that we can test. So not only do I think it's true, I think Christianity best explains reality. Free will, origin of life, origin of the universe, existence of the soul, historical Jesus, intelligent design. I actually think Christianity best explains this. Okay, now let me take a step back before we work through some of the questions that came up. I'm curious, what do you think as a whole, how do you think you treated your atheist guest? I'm curious, what in individual words, you thought antagonistic, I heard that? Spiteful or respectful? Okay. Confrontational? What'd you say? Combative? Okay, we've got quite a range of interpretations here. Annoyed? Okay, wait, I was annoyed or you were? Now, how you treated me, I'm curious.
I thought we were pretty polite, considering some of us wanted to argue and jump out of our seats.
Okay. So you didn't really show what you were actually feeling is what you're, okay, I could see it on some of your faces. Okay, fair enough. Now, just for the record, I've done this actually all over the world. Youth groups of 12 to a stadium in the Philippines with 8,000 people. I think that was too many. Afterwards, I'm like, that was a lot of people. I'm actually encouraged. This group was by far, and I'm not just saying this, Pastor, one of the more thoughtful and attempts to be polite and gracious of any group I have ever spoken to and done this. And remember this group, all right? Now, let me give you, doing this hundreds of times. I've had people boo me, call me names. Some of you would have, probably if you got the mic, or at least you wanted to, maybe. So I was doing this in Duluth, Minnesota, and I turned around to start in this group of students. There were 6,000 students at stadium. They go, boo, boo, go home, Mr. Atheist. And youth pastor goes, you're going to hell, like he shouts it out. So I went off character. I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm invited to speak. I have a different worldview. Why boo me and disrespect me? Wasn't Jesus accused of being a friend of sinners? Didn't he say love your enemies? Didn't Paul say if you speak in tongues and prophecy but have not love, you have nothing? Like I laid into these students. It was silent in the entire stadium, which proves there's a God because junior hires were present. A summer or two later, I was speaking in Salt Lake City to about this size, maybe 500, 600 people. And this group's sitting in the front. And as soon as I turned around to start, they're like, woo, we love you, Mr. Atheist. And I was like taken off guard by this. So afterwards, I said, why did you cheer that way for the atheist? They said, well, We were part of the group that booed you in Minnesota. And my next thought was, they got the point. They got the point. You see, I've done this so many times, and there's if I had gone a little longer, there's kind of a defensiveness and a frustration that just builds in, and people start saying things that they later look back on and go, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Why is it that we get a little bit defensive when I'm challenging you? One reason is you love Jesus and you want me to see it. I get that. Could another reason be that maybe as a church, we don't really know what we believe and why we believe it to have the confidence to engage people in thoughtful conversations? I think one of the 50% of millennials and down now think you shouldn't evangelize. 50%, because that's telling somebody else they're wrong about their deepest beliefs. I think one reason we don't do this and have more conversations is we're afraid somebody's going to ask us a tough question. What if they ask me to explain the Trinity? What if they ask me why God allows evil? What if they ask me fill in the blank? And so we don't engage people. What I found is when we know what we believe and why we believe it, there's a confidence that comes, and we're not threatened, and we're willing to engage people with a different belief system. The reason I do this is not because it's fun, although I'm not going to lie, it is fun for me. Sometimes I feel guilty. I'm like, this is really fun. And some people are like, gosh, why are you so hard? I'm like, if I stand up here and do a straw man of atheist beliefs, I'm actually doing a disservice to you. I have friends who believe all the exact same stuff that I just said up here. I'm not really worried in your church that anyone's going to wake up at midnight and become an atheist, although I would never get invited back if that happened, because of what you teach and what you do here in the church. But can you imagine this generation who has more challenges on their smartphone, younger than ever, goes to a university, no longer the support system, class after class, professor after professor, not always intentionally attacking Christianity, but just dismissing it as irrelevant, what this does to a kid's faith. Kids need to have community. They need to be loved, but they need to know what they believe and why they believe it. I was speaking at a youth group a few summers ago. I think it was a camp. There's about 500 students. And I kicked it off. I taught all week, and I kicked it off doing this atheist role play. And I just remember this group was like as defensive as any group I've ever done this with. They were like angry, and like it was great. And I remember this girl in the back stands up. She goes, "Mister, I want to read you something." I said, "Okay, what do you want to read me?" She says, "From the Bible, the Holy Word of God." I said, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe in the Bible." She goes, "I don't care. Listen up." She's going to be a great parent someday. She reads to me Psalms 14:1. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. I said, "You're calling me fool." She goes, "Yep, the Bible says it. That settles it. I believe it." And all her friends like, woo-hoo-hoo, giving each other five. They're like, "Got you, fool," and they sit down. When it was done, this girl came up to me and waited till everybody was gone. And she was at the camp. She was going to be a junior in high school, so probably 16 years old. And she kind of leans in and sheepishly goes, "I want to thank you for doing your best to defend atheism." I said, "Sure, why are you thanking me?" She goes, "Well, I'm an atheist." I said, "Really? How'd you end up here at camp?" She goes, "Well, I'm a leader in my youth group." I'm not kidding. I said, "I feel like I'm missing something." You said, "I grew up in the church, and I've just been told what to believe, but not why." I started to have questions. My parents would say, "Just read the Bible. Just have faith." They couldn't answer my questions. I started to realize I don't even believe this anymore. I said, "Have you told anyone?" She said, "No." I said, "Why not?" I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Because I'm afraid they'll treat me like they just treated you." I don't think we realize as Christians the words we use, the stories we tell, the jokes we laugh at communicate so much to an unbelieving world that they don't even hear our story of hope and grace and redemption because we often fail to love people the way Jesus wants us to love them. See, it's interesting. Jesus came in grace and truth because I see people in the church making one of two mistakes. Either they say, "I am God's prophet. I speak truth. I don't care if it hurts somebody's feelings." Okay? The other side is like, well, maybe the loving thing to do is to soften what the Bible says because I don't want to offend anybody. That's also a mistake because Jesus said it is the truth that sets us free. The key is to speak truth with a heart of love and compassion, grace and truth. How do we do this is often easier said than done. But in our culture that's more divided than ever, more angry than ever, one way Christians could just be different is if we take very seriously what we believe, and we know why, and we're thoughtful, and we have loving, gracious relationships and conversations with people. It's like people don't know what to do with that today. They expect you to get angry, expect you to get defensive. So I wrote a book, I didn't bring it, it was called Is God Just a Human Invention? Answering a lot of the questions that came up about evidence for the soul, origin of the universe, origin of life, etc., morality. And Christians were reading it, getting a good response. I thought, I'm going to call the largest free-thinking atheist group in Southern California where I live and see if they'll have a conversation about this. So I called the guy up, and I said, hey, my name is Sean McDowell, and he had actually been at the debate I mentioned at the services earlier today. I didn't know that. He goes, oh, I know who you are. I said, cool. I said, here's my idea. I'd be willing to come to your atheist skeptical group, sit in the hot seat, and you and all your friends can ask me anything you'd like to ask a Christian. I don't know about you, but that actually sounds like fun to me. It's not because I think I have all the answers. I'm well aware that I don't. So I go with my wife and my pastor up to this home. There's about 20 people there, and we sat on the hot seat about 2 hours, and they asked me a ton of questions, did my best to answer them. At the end, I said, could I have 15 minutes to ask you questions? He said, sure. I could have said, where does the universe come from? And by the way, all of the scientific evidence that we have points towards the universe having a cosmic beginning. If there's a beginning, there must be a beginner outside of space and time to bring it into existence. The beginning of the universe is one argument for a beginner or cause outside of the universe. I could have asked him about that. Could have asked him about the origin of life, which is a great question. And by the way, scientists don't have a clue how you can get life from non-life. And what I said about biological information was, well, false. The information we have is the same kind of information in a computer program or in a book that points towards an author of life. DNA, I think, is a powerful argument. I could have asked him to explain morality without God. One of the first questions, which is a great question. How do you get objective right and wrong without God? Now, I pointed towards evolution. But if morality has evolved, then it's changed and it's not fixed. So what's moral now might not be moral in the future. It's not objective standard morality. It just means we're wired to believe things are right and wrong, so we get our bodies in the right place and survive, but it actually doesn't follow that rape is wrong in a Darwinian worldview. I actually think the existence of a moral law points towards a moral law giver. Remember when I said the more we learn about science, the smaller the gaps become? Friends, it's the opposite. The more we probe the universe, the more we realize we don't know. But the more we see fingerprints of an intelligent mind. Beginning points towards a beginner. Origin of life and the information points towards a mind. The existence of an objective moral standard points towards a moral law giver. I could have asked him these tough questions. Instead, I just said, what blind spots do Christians have? What are things we say and do where skeptics and atheists don't even hear what we believe? And a lady sitting right in the front, she was probably 70 or so. I remember she said, listen. I said, what do you mean? She said, my Christian friends want to tell me why I'm wrong, but they don't want to listen to my views. Why should I listen to them when they don't listen to me? Fair. Fell in the back. He goes, stop the atheist jokes. I was like, man, dang it, I've got some good ones. Actually, this guy was in his 50s at the time, if I guess, and he had a son at Biola, interestingly enough. He was an atheist, said he left his faith and has a website trying to debunk it. Actually, the words he used, he said, stop slandering atheists. I said, that's a pretty strong charge. What do you mean? And he told me this. You'll find this interesting. Is he said, I will frequently go just sit in the back of a church and watch. I've had a number of my atheists and friends of other belief systems tell me they come and just sit in church to observe. Because if you think about it, even if you're not a Christian, church is kind of an interesting sociological phenomenon, right? I mean, the other day, people were in our church with their hands raised singing about the blood. I mean, if you don't understand Christian theology, you walk in a building and eyes are closed, hands are raised, thanking for the blood. Either it's a cult or a medical convention. We do weird things, and that's okay. He said, I go watch. He goes, almost every time I'm there, I hear some cheap shots against atheists or some non-Christian group. My wife was there. I remember afterwards, I'm like, this dude's got a complex. We're not that bad. I'm not kidding. A week or two later, we're in church. The pastor tells a joke at the expense of atheists. I thought, oh my goodness, he's right. He's right. I don't think we realize as Christians or really take stock the language we use, the stories we tell, the jokes we laugh at. Is it inviting to a broken and hurting and confused world? I'm not saying to compromise or soften the gospel. The gospel is offensive enough. Let us not take away from that offense, but certainly not add to it by failing to live the way Scripture calls us to live. So part of this was actually to push back and say, you know what, you don't have to have all the answers, by the way. I have 2 masters and a PhD, and I only mention that because I have the mic, and this is my job. And I'm kind of going to win, only in the sense because I can change the subject. I can ignore the question, if you notice that. I can use really big words and pretend I answered something. Like, there's a lot of tactics and strategies I use to kind of manipulate the conversation. The point was to just challenge you and say, gosh, do I really know what I believe and why? Have I thought about this? And what about this generation raised up hearing this all the time? Am I serious about equipping them? That was a part of the purpose of it. Now, we're going to take a break in a minute, but let me do this for 10 minutes. Let me just answer a few of the questions that came up so you don't leave going like, what the heck? So you tell me, of the specific things we talked about, which ones would you like me to address? Don't ask me about something else. Which one? What's that? Okay, basis of morality. Atheists can know right and wrong. Atheists can be moral. What atheism cannot do is give us an objective standard of right and wrong. It can't. How can atheists know right and wrong? Because they're made in the image of the very God that they reject. Now, I actually thought your question about free will was fantastic. That's a great question. There's actually a lot of atheists. Quantum mechanics doesn't explain free will. One thing people, if they want to blame the church, they say, look at Galileo. If they want to pretend something explains something, they say quantum mechanics. Doesn't explain anything. Even many atheists like Sam Harris will write a book called Free Will saying free will is an illusion. Now, I'm curious why he wants credits and royalties for it, since it was chemicals that actually wrote the book, but that's a separate issue. Right? You criticize the book. He goes, no, that's not what I meant. But if you're criticizing the book and there's no free will, your criticisms are based just as much on chemicals as the writing of the book. You can't have truth if there's no free will. Atheism can't account for free will, and you can't have a moral project if there's no free will. Because you can't blame someone for doing something wrong or praise somebody for doing something that's good. Atheism cannot give us free will. It can't give us human value. The same blind, purposeless process resulted in apes and flowers and jellyfish as resulted in you. So why do you have more value? And if you say things like self-consciousness, then you'll see why people are becoming in favor of infanticide in our culture. Atheism cannot explain human value, can't explain free will, and it cannot give us an objective standard of morality. I was debating Bart Campolo, son of the preacher Tony Campolo. You might recognize his name. He's an atheist, and we were online, and he says there's no objective morality, and then he starts criticizing me. He goes, well, you believe in a book that believes in slavery. I said, wait a minute. Why are you criticizing me? You just said there's no objective morality. And I called him on it. I'm like, you can't even condemn the Holocaust. Other questions? Oh, the soul. I'm glad you asked this. Okay, the soul is your immaterial self. It doesn't weigh anything. It's your center of consciousness that animates your body. Your soul has things like emotions are in the seat of the soul, will, morality. These are faculties of your soul. Okay? Now, in Matthew 10:28, Jesus said, beware of not the one who can just kill your body, but the one who can destroy your body and your soul. Fear God. Scriptures teach that we're body and soul. What's interesting is I think the evidence for the soul is powerful. Two ways. Number one, if you're just purely chemical, there can't be free will. There's no such thing as free will if you're purely a physical machine, right? If we're just purely physical, then you are operated on by laws in the environment like gravity that cause your body to go one place and not another. If there's free will, there has to be a thinking self that's not physical to act. By the way, if there's no free will, you can't even have love. So if you believe in love, you believe in a soul. If you believe in a soul, then you hold a biblical view of what it means to be human. So free will is one piece of evidence. Second, there's a ton for this. One, I think, is near-death experiences. Now, I'm not talking about people who go to heaven and tell a wonderful story about it. Like, that's fine. I have no problem in doubting those people. But what's interesting is when people's bodies stop functioning and they gain information they could not have had otherwise. I document a number of cases. There's actually a journal of near-death experiences. For example, just one quick case. A lady was in a heart attack, in a near-fatal crash, rushed to the hospital, medically dead. Describes coming out of her body, and in the hospital on the 4th story, a left men's blue tennis shoe with a smudge mark on the tip of it. She's like, I left my body and I saw that. Gathers herself, gets better, they go up there and find the shoe. Either she planted it, had the car crash, right? Like, that's nuts. There's stories like this of people describing and reporting information they could not have known in their dead physical state. This doesn't show Christianity is true, but it says when the body stops functioning, there's evidence that consciousness continues. There's other evidences we could give, but I'll leave it there. Those are a couple. There's a great book by J.P. Moreland, a co-worker of mine, just called The Soul. And it lays out the philosophical and scientific evidence, and it's powerful. It's powerful. Let's do a couple more. Yes? Ultimate meaning in life. Okay, so atheists are going to answer this differently. I've had atheists say, yes, there's meaning. You don't need God for meaning. That makes no sense to me. You can't get objective meaning. You can have individual meanings. And notice what I did. I didn't say, yeah, my meanings are abusing little kids, overeating, cheating on my spouse, cheating on my taxes. Like, of course, nobody's really going to say those things. It's always love and food and travel, things we agree are good. But if there's no objective meaning, which can only come from an author or a meaning giver, then our beliefs that our life has meaning are illusions built into us through this blind process of evolution. So if you embrace consistently an atheistic worldview, you could just say, we've been wired by evolution to think and crave meaning, but there really is no meaning. It's a trick to get us to actually behave and survive. So there's no objective difference between committing your life to rolling dice until you die and feeding the poor. If there's no God, there's no objective difference between those two, which is nuts. By the way, if everybody was blind, would anybody complain about not being able to see? No, we'd have no concept of being blind unless we had concept of light. Why is it that people run around and go, oh, the world has no meaning if there's not objective meaning? Right? Even the cry of meaningless tells us we know there's meaning, we should seek after meaning, and we should follow it, which doesn't make sense in an atheist world. Anybody else? While it's free. Yes? Oh, irreducible complexity. Okay, this is a big one. So an irreducibly complex system is one that has multiple interworking parts that if you remove one part, the whole thing doesn't function. Like take a mouse trap. You remove just the catch, it doesn't work 80%, it fails to work entirely, okay? So this has been a challenge to Darwinian evolution because we look in things like the flagella, which are whip-like tail on the back of cells, and they have multiple interworking parts where if one was absent, the whole thing doesn't work. So Kenneth Miller did write an article trying to explain the process, but he actually didn't explain it. He said, well, hypothetically, for example, take a mousetrap. You could have the platform, that could be a paperweight. Add a spring, it could be a tie. So you could get a mousetrap from different functions to the end. But what's he doing? He's inventing and reading meaning into it without any evidence that such a thing could happen through a blind, purposeless process. So I think irreducible complexity is one good challenge raised against this Darwinian mechanism for which I have not seen a natural explanation, how you get so many interworking parts together in the right way, of the right material, at the right time, all oriented towards the same function, when any simpler function wouldn't work. So I think that's one amongst many others. One of my big problems with Darwinism is I don't think there's a sufficient mechanism. I don't think random mutation. Now, some mutations are positive, but the vast majority are negative and deleterious. I don't think it's a sufficient mechanism to explain the complexity and diversity of life through a blind material process. I don't buy it. But when I see a mousetrap, I know a mind made it. So I do think there's certain things in nature that resist a Darwinian explanation and are better explained by an intelligent mind. Does that make sense? Just nod your head. That'll make me feel better. Thank you. Let's do one or two more. Yes, in the back. You got to be fast and loud. Okay, let me just take one. Let me take one and make sure I understand it. So you're a Christian, and you have people that witness to you and say, I'm an atheist. If I cease to exist, why would I even care? Wait, you are a Christian or you're not? Okay, here's why I believe in life after death. I'm telling you why I do, okay? That's all I can do, unless we had a longer conversation. I have no idea why they witness that way. I don't have a clue. If they witness the way you describe it, they probably need to work on their witnessing methods. Although the Holy Spirit can use anything. The reason I believe in there's life after death is because Jesus lived, he was crucified on a cross, buried in Joseph's tomb, rose from the dead, and appeared to Peter, to the apostles, to the 500. He appeared to the women. The evidence is convincing that Jesus rose from the grave, which tells us Jesus is God in human flesh, and this entire Christian story is true. So to me, I wouldn't witness that way. I don't have a clue why people do. I can't answer that. But I think we should bring it back to the person of Jesus, to the Christian story first, and then reason that we know it's true. Keep the main thing, right? Let's do one more. Go ahead. Oh, Josephus, of course. I have no idea. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Even if I was right about Josephus, it wouldn't prove Jesus didn't exist. It would just prove that this is not a source we can use, right? So if you disprove the positive evidence for the existence of God, it doesn't follow God doesn't exist. It just would follow we can't prove it or show it. So Josephus was a Jew writing for the Roman Empire at the end of the 1st century. There are 2 references in Josephus to the historical Jesus. Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 18, Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 20. One of them where he mentions the death of James, the brother of Jesus, almost no scholars doubt that this is valid because Jesus is mentioned in passing only because James was killed while one of Festus and somebody else gets on the throne and there's all this political drama. Jesus is thrown in incidentally and it doesn't help advance the story about Jesus. Nobody questions that. Now, Antiquities of the Jews 20 is called a Testimonium Flavianum, where Josephus points towards Christians believing that Jesus was killed by Pontius Pilate under Tiberius Caesar, believed he was the Messiah and rose on the third day. This passage is contested, okay? So scholars differ on it. I think the best explanation is there was an early, simpler statement that Josephus said about Jesus, and some Christians probably flowered it up a little later on, but there actually was a 10th century Arabic manuscript found with the simpler statement about Jesus that kind of affirms this hypothesis. Well, why didn't Christians cite it? Because it wouldn't help them. There was no reason for them to cite it. Nobody doubted that Jesus existed until the 18th century. There was no reason to cite it. So one passage of Josephus, almost all scholars accept it. The other one, a little bit contested, but we have good reason to believe that he refers to Jesus. We also have Tacitus, we have Suetonius, and we have the scriptures. Even if there was no Greek or Jew or Roman who mentioned Jesus for 200 years, I would still believe the Christian story because of the good historical evidence archaeologically, manuscript-wise, that we have for the scriptures themselves. Josephus is an additional reference that just makes the further claim. Does that make sense? But he didn't believe in the historical Jesus, or he probably would have been a Christian, but he cites him and helps surround the basic story of the life of Christ. Glad you asked it. Now, many more things could be asked. I wanted to give you a sense. We're not going to answer all of it. My goal was to, number one, challenge you to think this through and ask, how well do I know what I believe? Am I ready with an answer? Have I taken seriously my beliefs? And in particular, when it comes to young people, have I helped them as well? All right, now, if you want to come up, Pastor Dan, if you want to come up here really fast, he's just going to transition us. We're going to talk about, I have been researching for at least, I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 3 years, this new generation called Gen Z. Millennials are gone. They're out of college. What matters is this new generation. And there are some fascinating trends we're going to look at. We're going to get you out of here at 3, not because I care about you, but I care about getting home and getting my flight. I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you. I better get home tonight for the sake of my kids. He's just going to transition us 1 or 2 minutes, but I think you'll find this research fascinating. And I actually have a link for you where I'm just going to send you this PowerPoint, all the information if it's helpful for you. So you can sit here and take notes if you want to, that's fine. Or at the end, there's a link where you can just download it. And all I ask is that you use it for yourself. Don't post it online. But if it helps you in your study or with a small group or just with another parent or something, you're welcome to it. Okay, Atheist is gone. You guys converted me. Don't worry. So there's a new generation around called Gen Z. And interesting about Gen Z is Proverbs 24:3 says, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. As we look at a generation, there's a tendency to be skeptical and say, well, they need to just think like us and get with the program. Let me encourage us to say, you know what, let's start by understanding and try to see how this generation understands and thinks about the world so we can love them. My father's often said to me, it's more important to understand than to be understood. Can you imagine if Christians had the attitude that says, I want to understand first before I want to be understood? Let's think this way about this new generation. Now, Generation Z are those born between 1995 and 2010. And some demographers will give it a little bit of a different time, like 2000 and 2015. Basically, Gen Zers are like elementary students up through college. This is the new generation. Sometimes they're called iGen, transgeneration, post-millennials, selfie generation, on and on. But Gen Z seems to have stuck the most. Here's some things I think you'll find interesting. Ronald Reagan is as far in the past for them as Dwight Eisenhower was for their parents. Email is an ancient and useless technology. Columbine is merely a flower. There is no collective memory of Columbine, although school shootings have been a part of their experience. Amazon is an online retailer, not a river in South America. The band Nirvana is classical rock. Stephen Curry is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan ever was. Certainly LeBron. Jordan's old. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just reporting the worldview many hold. YouTubers are the new stars. Eminem and LL Cool J could show up at a parents' weekend. Press pound on the phone is now translated as hit hashtag. And with GPS, they have never needed directions or experienced what it means to get lost. Isn't that interesting? Never had that collective, wonderful experience. Now, 25% of the US population are Gen Zers. In other countries in the world, like Philippines, it's like 33%. A quarter of the population is now made up of Gen Zers, and it's growing, 25%. Now, when you think about generations, sometimes we think of collective experiences that define a generation. So you think of baby boomers, you can't not think of Vietnam or the assassination of Kennedy, a defining experience for a generation. You think about Gen Xers, my generation. You think of things like Magic Johnson announcing that he got HIV, the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the explosion of the Challenger. Now, you think of Gen Zers, depending on their age, you'll think of things like, in many ways, they're a post-9/11 generation. The first generation without any collective experience of 9/11, so they've been raised in the moral, living and experiencing the moral questions in a post-9/11 world. The financial tragedy, some of the natural disasters, school shootings, have defined this generation. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, you just went from baby boomers to Gen Xers, you skipped millennials, and you went to Gen Z. Look, if you're a millennial and you're offended, we will have a trophy for you in the back. Yeah. Blame the parents, not them. All right, now I want you to do something. I want you to write down the first words that come to your mind when you think of Gen Z. So you think of a young person today, say junior high, high school. What are the first words that come to your mind when you think of them? Write down the first words that come to your mind. Now, some of you are like, I don't have to write it down. I got photographic memory. The problem is you just don't have any film. If you don't understand that joke, ask somebody older than a millennial, and they'll explain it to you. Right? Film. What is film? So what words? You can just tell me. What individual words come to your mind when you think of this generation? Fortnite. You said me, okay. Influenced. Raise your hand just because I'm having a hard time here. Go ahead. Clueless, okay. Unappreciative, okay. Distracted, okay. Entitled, okay. All right. Now, I sent out a tweet a while ago, and I said I would describe Gen Z, born between 1995 and 2000, as entrepreneurial, fluid, diverse, digital, and overwhelmed. What words would you use? And then people started chiming in, and positive words were like hardworking, accepting, driven, global, diverse, and passionate. Negative words were like entitled, lazy, gullible, hopeless, delusional, and disconnected. I'm going to make a really important point. Which kind of words did you guys offer? Don't answer, just think. Positive or negative? Because let me tell you something. The lens through which you see this generation will shape the way you relate to them. Every older generation that has ever existed is always concerned and uses negative words to describe the next. There's nothing ultimately different about Gen Z. My encouragement is how we view this generation shapes how we relate to them. Keep it positive. I'm not saying ignore the negatives. There are concerns. But this is a promising generation made in the image of God that values authenticity. If they think we see them as a distraction, who are entitled, who are gullible, and get in the way, they will see that we treat them that way. Friends, it's a privilege to minister to this generation and a responsibility. But second, remember, every student has a unique story. Every student has a unique story. our stats about this generation can only take us so far. They give us perspective, give us insight, but every young person processes this differently based on their personality and their family and their experience and where they grow up. And by the way, you and I have much more in common with the next generation than we do differences. Just because we're human, we have far more in common. Desire for relationship, significance, hope, fun, knowledge. We have way more in common. So let's choose to see this as a privilege. Now I'm going to give you 8 insights that I've come across studying this generation, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies, as well as examining my own kids and the young people that I work with. And the obvious first one is that Gen Z, they're digital natives. They're the first generation raised, many of them moving and manipulating screens before they can even read. We don't even know yet what this does to the brain and relationships and self-image. It's like we're performing an experiment on this generation without even thinking about it. Dr. Tim Omore says, teens put technology in the same category as air and water. They cannot imagine living without being connected all the time. And it's true. In fact, I was walking onto a plane one time, and I saw this grandma, and she was reading on a smartphone a book. And I thought, wow, the digital revolution is here, when older generations are totally comfortable using technology. So I tweeted out something like that, and a guy responds, he goes, no, you're missing it. The digital revolution will only be here when you and your generation don't even recognize how ubiquitous technology is. And I thought, that guy's right. I have a memory of a pre-smartphone world. This generation has no collective memory of a world where you are not connected and have instant access to information. You have no collective memory of this. 79% display symptoms of emotional distress when they are away from their smartphones. And by the way, this stat is not just about Gen Z. Gen Zers are more concerned about using a smartphone during a movie than during a wedding. Is that interesting? There's certain new ways that people use and think about technology, and we tend to think, well, you shouldn't use it this way or you're rude, and maybe they are being rude, but they might not be intending to. One of the things is at least try to understand how and why this generation uses technology and what it means to them. So Pastor Matt and I were talking. When I grew up, I remember when Nintendo first came out, and video games was just a fun thing that you would do. Now, for many of this generation, video games are a community and an identity. It's changed. It's changed. So think about it this way. Those of us born before the internet learned how to communicate online. Those born after the internet, including Gen Zers, learned how to communicate offline. Second, racially diverse. You know, Gen Z is the last non-white majority generation. The next generation, whatever they call them, Gen Alpha, I've heard, let's start over with the Greek alphabet, whatever, will be the first majority non-white group. But here's the key. They feel good about it. They only recognize diversity when it's lacking. It's the air they breathe. It's the culture they've grown up in. Between 2000 and 2010, the country's Hispanic population grew at 4 times the rate of the total population. The number one common last American name is Smith. You know what it will be soon? Rodriguez, number 1. Now in Europe, it'll be Mohammed, but that's for a different reason and another topic. The idea of a black president is not exceptional, it's normal. They've been raised seeing a black man in the highest office in the land and obviously miss what our country has gone through. It's not their fault, it's just the generation they're raised in. Now that doesn't mean racial tension is gone, that's not my point. But they've been raised where one of the highest values people talk about and push is diversity. This characterizes this generation. Gen Z's last generation will be majority white, 52%. Now, some of you say, well, we live in a community that may be more or less diverse, but through social media, it's now a universal experience of this generation. Even if it's not their immediate community, it's the world that they feel like they live in. Third is post-Christian. It's post-Christian. This is one of the most sobering ones. But those who read the Bible, pray, go to church, as a whole for this generation is significantly less. Now, there are pockets of communities and churches that it's thriving. I think this generation responds. I'm saying as a whole, there is a shift to a post-Christian generation. No, I'm not saying our culture was ever Christian. That's not my point. Okay, the idea of a Christian government is an oxymoron anyway. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. But the idea was, at least in principle, if you believed in Christian ideas, this is supposed to be a good thing, right? Even though the church and many others failed to live it out. Now, if you say you're a Christian, you're bigoted, hateful, homophobic, and intolerant. In fact, this week, a Washington Post article said Pence needs to step down as vice president because his bigotry against gays is just as bad as racist bigotry in the past in this governor from Virginia. This generation is raised in a culture that has values in principle that if you actually believe a Christian worldview, you are part of the problem. This is where the world is going, and they're embracing it. So Dr. Jean Twenge, in her book, iGen, said, the move away from religion is no longer piecemeal, small, or uncertain. It's large and definitive. More young Americans are thoroughly secular, disconnecting completely from religion, spirituality, and the larger questions of life. Now, it might be that in the past, people said, oh, I'm an American, I like apple pie, I like baseball, and I'm a Christian. Now people just choose not to embrace that identity. So we don't know exactly how many are jettisoning the identity versus jettisoning the practice. Does that make sense? That's one of the challenges. But according to Barna's recent study last year on Gen Z, 4% of Gen Zers have a biblical worldview. 4% in the way that Barna defines it. Fourth is fluid. This is a fluid generation. Now, I thought of other words like ambiguous. I was trying to find a more particular word, but then I thought if the idea is fluid, maybe I don't want a very particular defining word. But for this generation, there used to be categories that people took for granted that no longer apply. So things like technology has brought on a breakdown of the barriers between your personal life and your private life, work and home, entertainment versus work. Not to mention the nature of family has changed. So we have same-sex households, three-parent families, working moms, stay-at-home dads, couples choosing not to have kids. I mean, think about the 80s. The defining family show was The Cosby Show, right? Good, wholesome family, mother and father. Move to the 90s, it becomes like Friends, becomes kind of defining relational show. Move into the 2000s, and what show does it become? Modern Family, where any family is fine. It's become fluid, these categories that used to be taken for granted. By the way, the nuclear family will make up less than a third of all families in the U.S. by 2026. Less than a third. Can you imagine that? See, secularism devalues the family, but when the family is devalued, it encourages secularism. I think this gives the church an opportunity to build and live Christian marriages because we all know that people thrive and need a mom and a dad and want to see healthy relationships. Facebook has 58 options for gender. Last I checked, they probably updated. I don't even know. 58 gender options. In fact, only half of teens today believe gender is defined by one sex at birth. Half. But argue that biological sex is irrelevant to your gender preference. There was an article in the Huffington Post a couple years ago, and they listed these different identities. asexual, aromantic, gray sexual, demisexual, lithromantic, pansexual, polysexual, panromantic, scoliosexual, and zucchini. I'm not making that up. I don't even remember what it means. But categories that used to be fixed, we could take for granted, are no longer with this generation. Things are viewed as being fluid. Fifth, overwhelmed. This is a generation that's overwhelmed. Time had a cover story in 2016, and Susanna Schrobsdorf, the author of this story, she said there was a pervasive sense that being a teenager today is a draining full-time job that includes doing schoolwork, managing a social media identity, and fretting about career, climate change, sexism, racism, you name it. A young girl who's interviewed named Faith Ann said, we're the first generation that cannot escape our problems at all. We're like little volcanoes. We're getting this constant pressure from our phones, from our relationships, from the way things are today. We're the first generation that can't escape bullying. Can't go to another school. It's all the time, everywhere, and it's just too much for many kids to handle. I get people attacking me daily online, and I'm pretty secure in my family, my identity, my relationship with Christ. I don't like it, but I've learned to deal with it. Can you imagine being 12, 13, trying to find out who you are? No wonder it's so hard for this generation. No wonder it can feel overwhelmed. 68%, two-thirds, feel overwhelmed by everything they have to do each week. These are 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, feeling overwhelmed. Sixth is lonely. There is an epidemic of loneliness in our culture as a whole and with Gen Z. An epidemic of loneliness. In her excellent book, Gen, she said, Gen Z is on the verge of the greatest mental health crisis in decades. And what's interesting is I talk to people in the military. I just talked with somebody from a different medical field. And I'll say, are you seeing this? And I am hearing at camps, I'm hearing at conferences, I'm hearing in the medical field, I'm hearing in all sorts of different fields, that this sense of loneliness and depression is growing and increasing dramatically in our culture as a whole and also with Gen Z. Susanna Schrobsdorf said, anxiety and depression in high school kids has been on the rise since 2012 after several years of stability. It's a phenomenon that cuts across all demographics, suburban, urban, and rural. Whenever you see a trend that's both genders, it's rich and poor, different races, different areas, you think something bigger is going on. And around 2012, it starts the hockey stick increase when Gen Zers start to hit junior high, roughly, and get smartphones. Now, smartphones are neither morally good nor morally bad, but we don't often think how they affect our worldview. I mean, can you imagine the images that kids are looking at nonstop all day on Instagram? Everybody's life looks happy and looks good, and yours doesn't feel the same. There's constant comparison. But ironically, connecting with the phone, I'm not saying it's bad. I love Instagram and other things. But a like on Instagram doesn't equal a physical hug. It's a generation that's more digitally connected than ever, but more lonely than ever. Do you know, I got to make sure I get this right. More 8th graders 6 years ago went out with their friends than 12th graders do today. Playing video games. They're at home. It's too much hassle. You've got technology. You've got porn. You've got other things to distract you. It is affecting relationships negatively. 3 million adolescents, 12 to 17, have had a major depressive episode in this past year. 3 million. 3 million. Seventh, pragmatic. What's interesting, though, is this generation is actually less likely to drink and to have, Gen Zers are less likely to drink underage and more likely to wear seatbelts. Some of that is because helicopter parents that are worried for kids to go anywhere without getting hurt, right? I actually think an argument can be made. We have been so worried about millennials and other generations getting hurt that we've actually stunted their growth. So you know there's an increase in peanut allergies. I just listened to a study by John Haidt on this. And he said they took two groups of people. Those who both groups they thought could have a peanut allergy. Some they exposed to peanuts, dealt with them, some they didn't. Those who were exposed to peanut allergies had a far less likelihood to carry that into adult years and beyond. Those who were kept from peanut allergies increased it like tenfold. So we're actually keeping kids so safe and so secure. We're not allowing them to make mistakes, get bruises, and actually grow up and mature. Ironically, it works opposite, but this is a generation that is pragmatic. They have heard about how accidents in the head. My son had a concussion this past week. In the past, they'd be like, hey, you're fine, get out there and keep playing. No, there's something positive about realizing this affects the brain. So on the flip side, it's kind of a pragmatic, practical generation that's less idealistic than previous generations. 8 is individualistic. Somebody shouted out, me. Now, baby boomers were called the me generation. The cover of Time in 2014 called millennials the me, me, me generation. You might say Gen Zers are the me, 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 me generation. And I'm not picking on them. They've been grown up being told, as long as you believe something, as long as you feel it, it's true for you. And the greatest sin is to judge somebody else's lifestyle. Of course they're going to see the world this way. Of course they are. In fact, Dan Fisher said Gen Z is used to having everything personalized just for them. From playlists to news feeds to product features of all kinds, they've grown up expecting that. So look, I love this illustration. Any of you kids remember the Coke versus Pepsi commercials? Do you remember this? And it was always Pepsi that put it on. It was a blind taste, and people go, oh my goodness, this is so much better. Yep, it's Pepsi. Pepsi's better than Coke. What's the assumption behind this commercial? That if you want a soda, you really have 2 options, right? You can get a Sprite, you can get a root beer, but really it's Coke versus Pepsi. Do you know today you can buy your own soda making machine, the size you want, the fizz you want, the level of flavor tailored just for you? You know how many drink options you can get at Starbucks? 87,000 different drink options. This is a world with endless choice. I grew up in a town called Julian in the mountains of San Diego, and if I wanted a toy, it was like 5 options, Sears robot calendar, wait 2 to 3 weeks to get it. Now, endless options, 1 click away, and it'll arrive on a drone just for you. This teaches a generation, listen very carefully, rather than having to conform their life to an external truth, they conform reality to their desires. That's how it teaches them to see the world. Brian Kissinger said they don't have to listen to Top 40 radio anymore. They can listen to Pandora or Spotify. They don't have to watch network TV. They can stream Netflix. These things teach teens that they're the center of the universe, that life will tailor itself to their tastes and schedules. I think he's right. Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit, ministry I just love, and I'm going to come back to, he said, people describe this generation as apathetic, but the true state of youth today is much more nuanced. They're actually psychically numb. With shopping and surfing available 24 hours a day, young adults believe they can have what they want, when they want it, how they want it, and with whomever they want it. Right? This is the world they've been raised in, how they've been taught to see reality. I'm not blaming them. I'm trying to lighten the reality of the culture that we live in and how it shapes young minds. So let me give you another example. Think about how endless access to information shapes the way this generation thinks. Go back again to the Kennedy assassination. There were a conspiracy or 2 that showed up because we only had a few cameras and minimal footage, right? So conspiracies arose. The assumption was if we had more information, we could get rid of the conspiracies and we could arrive at truth. Fast forward to 9/11. Are there more conspiracies or less? There's more. Is there more information or less? There's dozens of cameras, dozens of video pictures. So in other words, sometimes people think because we have more information on the internet, there's more confidence in truth. Friends, it's the reverse. This generation is trained to think there's always somebody smart who will see the world differently, so why should I listen to you? There's a crisis in can there even be knowledge and truth today? That's the generation we live in. So a friend of mine, a cold case detective, and I wrote a book. It's not coming out till April. It hasn't been released, but we basically think there's 2 broad ways to address this. broadly speaking, 30,000-foot view. Give young Christians a belief system that helps them navigate reality, a worldview. In other words, here's a generation with endless competing voices telling them, here's the good life, here's what matters, here's how you get happiness. It's only when kids have a worldview or a belief system by which they can funnel certain ideas that they're able to know what is important, what's not, what is true, and what is false. A Christian belief system has always been important. Paul says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But never has a generation had so many messages nonstop pounded home to them that are in conflict with a Christian view of life. So what's a worldview? Here's a complex definition. A view of the world. Obviously, I'm messing with you. A worldview is a belief system. It's a philosophy of life. It's like a mental map of reality. And we all live and operate under a certain philosophy of life. This is what I was hinting at in my talk earlier about how our culture compartmentalizes. But it's when we help young people to see, no, the Christian worldview has something to say about art. It has something to say about science. It has something to say about movies. It has something to say about A, B, C, fill in the blank, that they realize this isn't something that's private. This is a whole way of looking at life. My father often said to me, he said, son, I'll never forget it. If something is biblical, it's true. If something is true, it's biblical. There's not like biblical truth and other truth. There's simply truth. So something's in the Bible and we properly interpret it and we examine reality, we'll find that it's true. And if something is true and the Bible addresses it, we'll find it coheres. A worldview is developing a biblical way of thinking about everything. About everything. And I mentioned earlier about at Biola, our philosophy is think biblically about everything. How do we help a generation to think Christianly about all areas of life? It's when they see that Christianity is not just true for me, but it's subjectively true and shapes the way that I live, that this generation will stand up and not be taken in by the ideas of the world. That's the heart of it, is a Christian worldview. Abraham Kuyper, the great Dutch philosopher and theologian, said there's not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry out, mine. And he's right. He's right. It's in the context of a worldview. Now here's reality. David Kinnaman's president of the Barna Research Group. And he said in his massive research, he said, it's a modern tragedy despite years of church-based experiences and countless hours of Bible-centered teaching. Millions of next-generation Christians have no idea that their faith connects to their life's work. If you come to church and you just learn Bible studies, and it's interesting and motivational, but it never translates to your relationship, to your work, to your hobby, to your finances, what's the point? What's the point? I was speaking at church in Albuquerque, and I met two men in their 30s who are both mechanical engineers. Been in the church their whole life. I said, how do you uniquely think about what it means to be a mechanical engineer as a Christian? I kid you not. They looked at each other, they looked at me, and they said, I don't know, we've never thought about it. I thought, oh my goodness, what's happened? How can somebody spend years in church and not realize that their faith translates into what they do every day? No wonder people are living powerless lives when they don't see the connection of the gospel to everything in life. It's a world view. Now, we could talk about this so much more, but at the end, I'll give you some tools that might help. But I'm not going in depth because I know you have a church that takes this seriously. And we talked about in the church service some practical ways to do this with kids. But as you and I think about our kids, our grandkids, we think about this next generation. We have to see it through the lens of how are we helping them to see and experience the world as Jesus did. Because people who see the world as Jesus did are more likely to live in the world as Jesus did and still does through the Holy Spirit. Friends, it's worldview. We have to give a mental map of reality to help this generation navigate culture. There's a lot of talks about why kids leave the faith, abandon the church, and there can be a lot of reasons for this. At its heart, I think the studies show that we have failed to give kids a belief system that can help them navigate reality from a Christian perspective with confidence. Here's one practical way I did this with my kids. My son came to me recently, he's 14, and wanted to see this movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. Did any of you see this movie about the music band Queen? You can admit it in church that you saw a movie on Queen. Okay. So it's a story of the band Queen. And they have some really unique We Will Rock You songs and others. Really kind of just a unique band. It tells a story. But the lead singer died of AIDS. And from reading stuff online, it kind of pushed a certain moral agenda that I think is in tension with the Christian worldview. My son wanted to see it. Some of his friends saw it, and he was interested. I said, well, here's the deal. I'll take you and one friend whose parent agrees. We'll go see the movie. Then we're going to come home, and we're just going to talk about it. I'm not going to lecture you. We're going to talk about it. He agreed. Now, there's nothing explicitly sexual. Okay, I read online. You've got to obviously be careful. We watched the movie. Cinematically, it was an interesting movie. It was well done from that perspective. We came home. I said, as Christians, how can we think about this? What can we affirm in this movie? What agenda do you think the movie was pushing? What would Jesus say about this? Whatever. We just talked for about 20 minutes and we were done. That was simply a way of trying to say, I want my son to learn how to think Christianly. He was interested in that, used it as an opportunity, and very intentionally engaged him to develop a Christian worldview. That's the heart of it with this generation, helping them to think Christianly. So remember we said, how do we engage a generation with information overload? One is giving them a belief system where they can know what is true, what is false, what is valuable, what is not valuable. They need a mental map for reality. Second is to earn the trust to communicate that truth to this generation through relationships. I've actually become convinced that one of the most important commodities today is trust. Think about it. Your kids, your grandkids, have essentially an infinite number of voices trying to vie for their hearts and minds. The question is, why should they listen to you? Why listen to you? One big reason is if there's trust that's built up, they will listen. So when my father first wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict, nobody had access to this information, fulfilled prophecy, evidence for the manuscripts. My dad got it in Europe and brought it back. So its value was that nobody had access to it. When we updated it in 2017, there's endless information. So why buy a book when the information is all there, right? That's an interesting question. And I came to two reasons. Number one is you can look it on the internet, but if you have a book of somebody who saves you all the time, that's still worth an investment, at least to me. Second is trust. Is that my father has built a name and a reputation of both character and consistency. When people say, who should I listen to? Because he's been consistent, and his son, who's seen him on stage and off, says you have reason to trust him. He's human, but he's built this trust. That's a voice worth listening to. So a big question is, how do we build trust with our kids? How do we build trust with our grandkids? So they will listen to our voice amidst all the other voices vying for their hearts and their minds. And I'm convinced this is done in the context of relationship when we build truth. At the heart of it, this generation, like I said earlier, has more challenges being a digital native, living in an age where they're told these boundaries and fluidity doesn't apply anymore. In a more diverse world, right? In a loneliness and being overwhelmed. But I also believe, because I know Gen Zers, they want a challenge. They want meaning. And they want adults like you and like me to step in and build relationships with them and care. This generation responds when we do that. Now, let me give a couple resources that might help, and then I think we have time for maybe a few questions. Matt, where are you, buddy? Oh, wake up. Wake him up. No, I'm kidding. He's awake. we have time to take maybe a few questions. That's cool. Resources that might help, okay? And some of these will be interesting to you. Some you're like, doesn't interest me at all, okay? When there's weekends like this, one of the challenges I give is I say, come study with me at Biola. I'm not kidding. If you have an undergrad degree in anything, and I think a 2.0, I think, don't quote me on that, but an undergrad degree, you can come study, get a distant master's in apologetics. It's only 37 units. And then you come back and you be a resource for the church, for your pastor, to counsel kids, to help in research, to teach. If you've ever thought about studying, just shoot me an email through my website and I'll connect you. We'd love to have you come and partner with us. Our whole goal is to strengthen the local church by just training people in theology and apologetics. Now, I know most of you won't do that, but if some of you do, we'd love to have you come. Second, for parents, when parents ask me, what's the single most important thing I can do with my kids? I would encourage you to go to something called Summit. Now, I speak, somebody's excited about it. Did you go? You went to Summit? You went 3 times? How old are you? You're 24. Good for you. So you were sent by your parents the first time, and then you decided to go second and third? All 3 of your kids went. Did you enjoy it? Was it very helpful for your worldview? Say yes, because I'm really vulnerable right now. I'm just kidding. She's obviously enthusiastic. So, look, all I'm going to say is Summit is I speak for them at different events, and every chance I get, I love to just push and promote what they do because it's a huge resource for parents. 12-day worldview experience. It's like a camp, but in the sense they'll bring in the best speakers, unlike pro-life. How do you make a case for life? Bring in Scott Klusendorf all morning, the most thoughtful defender of life, I think, on the planet. How do we know the Bible's true? Oftentimes my dad comes in and teaches all morning how we know the Bible's true. I'll give a talk on truth. I actually do my atheist role play there sometimes. Why does God allow evil? How do you think about politics, economics, all these different topics? How do you think Christianly about them? They're in Pennsylvania, they're in Tennessee, but in Colorado is the coolest one. You just fly out there if you're 16 to 25. So if you have a kid or a grandkid that age, think about investing in that. It can be a game changer for students. I actually sent my students to Summit a while ago, and a girl came back. She's like, that was awesome, changed my life. I was like, what the heck? You're in my class 2 years, you go to that lousy conference, and that changes your life? But then sometimes in a different setting, from people who are the experts, surrounded by other kids and a little bit older mentors, it changes things. So I have a handful back there. Please take one of these and just think about sending your kids. I think you'll find it helpful. If it's helpful to you, a few of you told me last time you signed up, I'm going to skip that because of time. But this PowerPoint is actually, I put it up on a site just for today for you. And there's a few other points we didn't get to, kind of how to develop relationships. SeanMcDowell.org/River City. If you just go there, you can download this presentation. I just ask, don't post it online or like spread it out to anybody randomly. This is for you in your local Bible study, with your friends, for your personal study, in a classroom is fine. But if it helps you, that will be available for download. All right, let's take maybe 5 or 10 minutes and we can just take some questions. If there's something hanging from the atheist role play and you have to know, you can ask me that, or related to this on Gen Z, maybe even something practical that would be helpful. I'd be happy to jump in. Are we out of the books, by the way? Are there any books back? Does anybody know? Where was my wonderful assistants? Are there any books left? There's 2 or 3 evidence that demands a verdicts that are back there. So if you didn't get them, rush back there quickly, tackle somebody along the way. I don't want to carry him back. Going to the highest bidder. Are there any questions from today? So I see one in the back there, and I heard someone, but I don't see you. Oh.
I wanted to ask you in your atheist role play.
Sure.
The evidence of miracles, like in the Bible and ones today where people are given 4-stage cancer diagnosis. They go to the doctor, x-rays are taken, and they come back to get another checkup, and it's all gone.
How an atheist would respond.
Yeah.
The Bible, an atheist would say, it's false. It's been changed in translation. There's miracles in other religions. I don't believe the Bible's true. That's where an atheist would go. To personal reports, they'd say, you know what? It's always a friend of a friend of a friend. There's never proof someone had cancer, prayed, and it was taken away because of the cancer. Besides, God doesn't heal a ton of people. If he's good, why doesn't he heal them? That's what an atheist would say. What I would say back is pick up Craig Keener's 2-volume set, leading New Testament scholar in the world called Miracles. And he actually documents very carefully hundreds of millions. He goes, if you want to be conservative, tens of millions of Christians who believe they have seen and experienced miracles today. There is very powerful evidence and compelling eyewitness testimony. In fact, almost every other week I'm traveling somewhere, I mention this, and somebody comes up and shares a story with me and has shown me pictures, and I have no reason to doubt it. So if you don't want to believe and you're an atheist, there's always ways to explain it away. Look, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and they want to kill Lazarus. Poor guy died already once, and they want to run Jesus out of town. There's always a way to not believe something, but there is good reason to believe that miracles have happened and continue to happen today.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How would you address an average atheist? Because 95% of what you said was like, wah, 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 wah. And I don't think that my neighbors across the street who are atheists are going to be like,
I'm not sure if that
quantum
was a
physics,
compliment
tell me.
or an insult. I don't know how to, I'm just playing
It's a
with you.
high compliment to your intelligence.
So, oh, wow, nice
but-
try to save the narrative. So here's the deal. I have read more atheist stuff and thought about it more than most atheists. I actually finished speaking one time, and a guy kind of came down fast, almost in a way that made me nervous. He was coming at me, and he goes, that was really good. You defended atheism better than I could, and I'm an atheist. I said, you want to know why I'm not? He goes, no. Which was interesting. So look, if you take the time to read one or two books and think about it, you're not an expert, but you actually know more than what most people know. You don't have to get a PhD. We'd love to have you come study with us, but you don't have to come get a master's degree in apologetics to have these conversations, okay? Part of this was to challenge and unseat people to at least ask the uncomfortable question, am I really ready with an answer? Most people are not that savvy and thoughtful when it comes to being an atheist. Even if you don't know, you can always listen. You can ask people what they believe, why they believe it. I've actually found with your average atheist, whatever that means, I want to build a relationship. Just listen to them. I mean, what an interesting conversation. Tell me when you decided to be an atheist. What convinced you to be an atheist? How have people treated you differently? Is there anything that would make you believe in God? Who do you think Jesus is? Do you ever think about hope in the afterlife? I mean, just asking these questions, showing you're the kind of person who's curious and wants to listen can open up a door to conversation. But I don't care if they're excellent or average or below average. If their heart is not open, there might not be anything you can do to force someone to believe. Remember when the rich young ruler walked away from Jesus and he goes, oh, actually, just keep 8 of them. Oh, no, just keep 6 commandments. But that's not how Mark 10 goes. What does he do? He lets them walk away. Because Jesus said there's only some with eyes to see and with ears to hear. So love them, pray for them, build a relationship, look for opportunities to have real conversation, and try to have a long-term view if you can, hoping that if something goes wrong in this person's life, that you would be the person they would think of that would pray for them and talk with them and maybe have an opening to share Christ. Although the way you picked on me, lady, I don't know if... Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yes?
I have a question. We have, with the prevalence of the internet, Wikipedia, stuff like that, anybody could edit anything. How do we filter through all of that stuff to help the next generation decide to know what's true and what's not? Because anybody who claims to be a historian can go on and post an article and say,
yep,
this fact about Jesus is not true.
That is a great question. So it depends on what setting you're in a conversation with a young person, in a classroom, in a family. I mean, the way you do this can vary based upon the dynamic with a young person. But I found it's actually just helpful to share a story and walk through with them certain abuses of how bad information is spread to start seeing some of the lies. Now, last time I was here, I shared a story that someone came up with earlier and reminded me of, that after the Obergefell decision in 2015, it's 2019 now, it's been a long day. I got a call from CNN to go be on a show to talk about the same-sex marriage Supreme Court ruling. And I couldn't do it, so the guy goes, hey, I'll call you back later if we need you to call. And I was like, sure, didn't expect to hear from him. The executive producer, the producer of the show, called me back, and they were doing a show on the Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner transition. Guy goes, hey, would you be willing to call in? And I was about to say no, but my son was 11 at the time, sitting in the back. He's like, Dad, call in, that's awesome. So I said yes because I want to be that dad, right? He goes, so what do you think about this transgender issue? And I said, well, Jesus loves transgender people. We need to slow down because transgender people are more likely to commit suicide, be depressed and lonely. Quit fighting over this, even though we differ, find common ground to help people who are transgender. Long pause. He goes, I'm sorry, I can't have you on. You're much too compassionate. I made a YouTube video of this. It got a few thousand hits. It hasn't gone gangbusters, but decent amount of hits. And I called it something like a lesson from a CNN non-interview. Like, you could find it. Sometimes I'll show that to students. And I'll say, hey, what do you think? What does this reveal? And I just ask them questions. They go, oh, why would they not be interested in truth? So actually later I watched the show and they had somebody call in from christianmilitant.com. And we watched the show. It was a circus. So one thing you could do, and you could do it with other things, this is just what came to my mind, you could show that video to a group of students. It's like a minute and a half, and I'm at CNN for something different, just shooting it on a cell phone, and I post it on YouTube. Show that to a young person, say, why would they say he's too compassionate? Do they want to help, or do they have another agenda? And you start unpacking, oh, it's about ratings. Oh, and to get ratings, you have to shock. And you just start to point these things out to students so they see the message behind the message. That's just an example. I with my kids all the time when I see stuff in the news. I'll say, hey, look at this story and the spin they're putting on, and I'll ask them questions and try to just help them uncover what is true. So I find most students, when there's an interesting story like this, will respond and ask them questions and just help them to uncover and see what is true and the strategies in the media. That's really the only way to do it that I know of. Besides locking them in a box, as Mark Twain said, but that's not going to work. What do you say, put a teenager in a box when they turn 13 and with a hole in it when they're 15, like plug it up? Don't try that one. Was there another question? I think if I walk out and, how far is the airport from here? It's 45 minutes? 35 minutes? No, you guys can go if you have to. I'm not going to keep you. I'll do 5 more minutes of questions because you came a long ways. If you have to go, go ahead. We'll frown at you and give you the look, but you can go. Let's go right here. Go ahead.
I'm just really curious. It's not like a big question, but it's just one of your stories when you were sharing about how you had a whole talk with all these atheists and then you were defending Christianity. What comes after that? Like, what? I'm just curious how those encounters end.
You know what? I actually was just there to try to answer whatever questions they had. Some of them don't have any interest in spiritual things, and I can't make them have interest. I got one email the next day from a young man. He's 25. He said, hey, I got a question for you. Can we get coffee? We got coffee. Went to Fish Tacos. I've invited him to hear me speak. Now, he didn't become a Christian. But out of that group, there was one who was interested in a further conversation. You know what's interesting? When Paul speaks on Mars Hill, it says, a few said, we'd like to hear more from you. So I saw that as just kind of casting my net to see who actually was interested in further conversation. If they're not, then I'm done. I'm not going to spend my time. But those who are interested, I'd love to have a conversation and continue this. That's all. Maybe someone will have a crisis on their atheist faith in the future. Remember this conversation, contact me. I don't know, but that's what I hope and that's what I pray for. Sometimes it happens, usually not, but Jesus said the gate is narrow, right? Go ahead. How do I respond to people that say the Bible's been changed over time? Yeah, here's how I respond. I say, really? Prove it. If somebody says the Bible's been changed, they're making an assertion. they need to back it up. I might not say, yeah, prove it, but I would say, that's an interesting hypothesis. How do you know the Bible's been changed? And what's your evidence that it's been changed? Look, questions are almost always better than an answer. Somebody says, you know evolution proves God doesn't exist. I go, really? How do you know evolution is true? And how would it prove that God doesn't exist? Look, if a person makes a statement, let them defend it. Ask questions and listen. 90+% of people who say things like, the Bible's been changed over time, or the Bible has contradictions, when you say, really, which specific contradictions did you have in mind? They don't know. They don't. Now, if they raise one you haven't heard, you go, good question. I'm going to go ask Pastor Jesse or Dan. I'll find an answer and I'll get back to you. That's fine. But ask questions. Let them defend it. But then the bottom line is, if you look at the number of manuscripts we have, how early they are, quotes in church fathers, there is no good historical reason to believe the Bible's been substantially changed. There's a few passages we're not sure about. John 7:53 to 8:11, the woman who was caught in adultery. That's not in our earliest manuscripts. We don't know that that story happened, the last 12 verses in Mark. There are a few passages we're not certain about. But all that follows is there's a few passages we're not certain about. It doesn't prove that the Bible's false. So whenever anybody makes an assertion, let them defend it. Ask them questions. That's it. That's how I respond. One more in the back, my man. Go, fast. Can you stand up and project your voice? So how do I respond to somebody who says there's no evidence for the Exodus? Very quickly, I'd say a couple things. I'd say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There is not a ton of definitive historical evidence that the Exodus happened. That's true. But you also have to ask the question, what kind of evidence would we expect of a nation that was decimated when historians have reasons for reporting certain things and not others that are disparaging to the authorities in charge? So there is some evidence for the Exodus. We have a chapter in the evidence that demands a verdict. Certain language that's used, certain historical sites. It's enough to say that it's plausible and it could have happened, even though the evidence for it is not as strong as the evidence, say, for the resurrection. We're dealing with something probably 3,400 years ago. So I think there's some evidence for it. But look, the heart of my faith is the resurrection. It's the resurrection. We can't prove all the things in the Old Testament. There's a lot of good archaeological evidence that they happened. But what is the show? The Exodus, not Revealed. I forget the recent program. What is it? I don't know Exodus Decoded. I'm not sure that one. You guys are not helpful at all. I'm tired. I get sarcastic when I'm tired. I actually think sarcasm is the 5th or 6th love language. We're done. I gotta go. There's a chapter in evidence that lays out some positive evidence for the Exodus. Folks, I don't normally do this. I gotta pack up, walk straight to my car, and leave. So I apologize to do that, but thank you for having me.
Before you guys go, let's say thank you to Sean for spending his Sunday with us.